Now, from Wish TV, your local news source, this is All Indiana Politics.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another edition of All Indiana Politics. We start this week with President Biden, the president marking 100 days in office by addressing Congress, laying out his plans for the next year. By now, you've likely heard the details. $200 billion for free preschool for all 3- and 4-year-olds in the country. Another $225 billion to be subsidized child care and support child care workers. It also extends the enhanced child credit through 2025. To pay for it, the president wants taxes for those making more than $400,000 per year raised to Bush-era levels. And he wants the IRS to crack down on top-level tax cheats.
We're going to get rid of the loopholes, allow Americans to make more than $1 million a year and pay a lower tax rate on their capital gains than Americans who receive a paycheck. We're only going to affect 0.3% of all Americans by that action, 0.3%. And the IRS is going to crack down on millionaires and billionaires who cheat on their taxes. It's estimated to be billions of dollars by think tanks that are left, right, and center. I'm not looking to punish anybody, but I will not add a tax burden, additional tax burden to the middle class in this country. They're already paying enough. I believe what I propose is fair, fiscally responsible, and it raises revenue to pay for the plans I propose and will create millions of jobs that will grow the economy.
Our job now is to get you reaction to the speech from Indiana's members of Congress. Our All Indiana Politics team talked with Democrat Andre Carson and Republican Jim Baird.
The president reminded all of us about the challenges that I think we've endured over the past year and how we've united since January 20th. And, he laid out a vision and goals to address the crises facing our country. He talked about a plan to continue delivering relief to the families, small businesses, and communities that are struggling. And he also reminded us that we need to come together to seize this opportunity and really build on the progress of his first 100 days.
I took away from his priorities and so on, the idea that big government is here. He really asked Americans to place their faith in the power of the federal government, not in themselves and their innovative and entrepreneurial ability.
I'm also glad he talked about his commitment to advancing racial equality and how it truly brought our country back from the brink.
The American Jobs Plan is a blue-collar blueprint to build America. That's what it is.
I have a little difficulty understanding that concept when we talked about closing down the Keystone Pipeline. 11,000 jobs by the stroke of a pen went down. There were communities along that pipeline that were already preparing, making plans to expand their little community and looking for the tax revenue. So I have a little difficulty understanding there again, because of those actions, that we're moving to be blue-collar workers.
He talked about lowering prescription drug prices. So he's trying to maintain a tone, which I certainly appreciated. And he really kind of focused on more funding for vaccine deployment and economic rescue payments. And so I think that he was trying to hit the right tone with certain voters who have felt marginalized for the past few decades.
How do we pay for my jobs and family plan? I made it clear we can do it without increasing the deficits. Let's start with what I will not do. I will not impose any tax increase on people making less than $400,000. But it's time for corporate America and the wealthiest 1% of Americans to just begin to pay their fair share. Just their fair share.
The thing that's really deceiving about that to me is we say, okay, those 400,000 and higher, those are the ones that are really going to pay the bill. And yet, many of those are the creators of companies and jobs. And so in the end, what do you think is going to happen to the bottom line? If that company has to pay more taxes, those taxes are going to be incorporated into their operating costs. And so whatever we buy, whatever we purchase, is going to be at a higher price. And so in essence, in the end, we're all going to pay the higher taxes. So the idea that you're exempt and you get complacent or relaxed because you say, oh, well, I'm not going to have to pay that because it's going to be those $400,000 and higher. Well, you better think through that, because in the end, you're going to pay that bill.
You know, Democrats aren't in universal agreement on this matter issue either. I mean, I'm a proud progressive, but I'm also a member of the New Dems coalition, and many of my colleagues in the New Dem coalition were concerned about our budget. And traditionally, you know, it has been on the backs of taxpayers. So we wrestle with ways in which we can come up with funding for these proposals, be it free community college or free healthcare. And so without placing additional burdens on taxpayers, there have been many ideas introduced, you know, collapsing much of our military industrial complex, or even adopting a European style value added tax, which would help relieve some taxpayers, particularly as they get their paychecks.
It's never, ever, ever been a good bet to bet against America, and it still isn't. We're the United States of America. There's not a single thing, nothing beyond our capacity. We can do whatever we set our minds to if we do it together.
Pleased to have the opportunity to speak with Senator Mike Braun from Washington, D.C. Busy time. He's back and forth to and from the state. I know you're on your 92 county tour when you can get back, but this week the issue that is confronting us midweek, the chance for the president to speak for a joint session of Congress. What do you like? What do you not like?
I've been open-minded to see where we can find that agreement across the aisle. Sadly, I think there's been a good overture to have discussions, and what I see on the COVID relief package, we didn't get any input, even though there was a lot of discussion. It wasn't really COVID relief. It should have been called a potpourri of different ideas. It was less than 10%. On the infrastructure bill, it looks like it's going the same way. And this most recent discussion, which we'll hear more about, I'm disappointed because it's given the illusion that we're working across the aisle. And the original COVID relief packages had strong bipartisan support. A lot of this is being done, every penny borrowed, with kind of pro forma discussion, very little input from our side. And I think they're going to keep doing it because the opportunity is here. They control the levers of power. How do we pay for it? Does it make sense? It seems to be polling well because everybody likes infrastructure, wants to get COVID in the rearview mirror, but there's a lot of, I think, framing it without actually having bipartisan support.
Payment details hopefully will become clear in the days and hours ahead. First word is it looks like
I think that's very clear that we're going to be borrowing most of the money, even though tax policy is framed up, especially with infrastructure. And that's kind of a false argument because you couldn't get close to paying for what they're wanting to spend, let alone bridge the $1 trillion deficit we run annually if they were being honest.
and just doing it through taxes.
Exactly.
Let's talk about this idea of human infrastructure, things like childcare and healthcare, education. You see real need in those areas. How do you address those?
You know, it's funny because the Democrats, as they frame issues, I generally never disagree with the topic of conversation. And then it's the disconnect on how do you pay for it? Do you want another federal program that we don't pay for most of it currently with what we do when we borrow 23% annually on everything we spend money on in the federal government? I'd love to see state and local governments be more active. I don't think the framers ever intended for us to solve problems of this nature from the top down. It'd be different if we were running things responsibly from a financial point of view. But the debt that our kids and grandkids are going to have to deal with down the road, you don't do that in local, county, and state governments. You always pay for it That's the sober side of the conversation as well.
That would be a tide that you'd have to turn that really has had input from both parties over not just the last administration, but several. Is that possible?
Sadly, that's a big frustration for me because Republicans, yes, have been almost as guilty as Democrats when it comes to their point of view about talking a good game and then rolling over and running us more and more into debt year after year. Even my kids and the generation that now is going to have to deal with it, regardless of their political point of view, know that does not make sense.
Senator Mike Braun, thanks for the time. We appreciate it. We'll let you get back to work on the Hill.
You bet.
Coming up, this week marked the start of Mike Pence's road back to the White House. His message in his first major event since leaving office, next on All Indiana Politics. Welcome back to All Indiana Politics. This week, we also saw Mike Pence's return to politics. The former vice president spoke Thursday in South Carolina. The state will be one of the first to vote in the 2024 presidential primary. It's Pence's first major public event since leaving office and what could be the first step in a run for president.
After 100 days of open borders, runaway spending, plans for higher taxes, a bigger welfare state, more government, defunding the police, abandoning the right to life, canceling our most cherished liberties, I've had enough. America is not a racist country. Democrats have been so busy advancing their liberal agenda that sometimes I feel like the left hand doesn't know what the far left hand is doing. It's on top of everything else in the last 100 days. There's been a wholehearted embrace of the radical left's all-encompassing, rapidly escalating war on American traditional values.
Pence met earlier Thursday with a group of nearly 400 pastors from and around South Carolina. It was also his first major event since surgery to have a pacemaker implanted in mid-April. Coming up, can President Biden find Republican support for his jobs plan? And do Republicans risk political damage for not supporting it? Our experts weigh in next on All Indiana Politics. Welcome back to All Indiana Politics as we welcome back Democrat Laura Beck and Republican Whitley Yates. Ladies, good to see you. Let's start with the president's speech to Congress from earlier last week. Polls show that it scored well with those who watched it. And Whitley, I want to start with you here. Is it dangerous for Republicans to oppose expanding education, child care, and tax increases on the top 1%?
Here's the problem is not whether or not we should oppose it. The problem is when you say you're going to do one thing, but you do something else. You push a COVID bill, but only 10% goes to COVID. So it sounds good that he wants to expand education, and all of these ideas sound good, but in practice, what he's actually going to do and how it's going to impact us is going to be a different story. And so that's what we're weary of, because that's what we've seen not only through the 100 days, but just his entire stint as a politician.
So, Laura, these plans pretty ambitious, almost as large as the New Deal. If they don't pass, does it set President Biden's administration up for failing?
Oh, I don't think it sets his administration up for failing at all. I mean, in fact, he's already made good on getting 100 million shots into people's arms for the vaccine in the first 100 days. I think what this really does is it establishes a framework to grow the middle class and to essentially have people pay their fair share in terms of taxes. But at the same time, it's also really digging deep into the very framework of our society. We've seen a lot of that just ripped apart by the pandemic. And so it's building a lot of it back together, but doing it in a way that's thoughtful and that is measurable, and also is going to have a major impact on families and ensuring that families who are middle class can either climb that economic ladder or remain in the middle class. So I think it's really incredibly important because it also looks at folks who are struggling with poverty and how to lift them out of poverty. Right. So it's very comprehensive, and frankly, it's a good start, and it's time we have this conversation.
I want to get a quick answer from both of you on this one. Does any of this pass? If so, what? Laura?
Well, I don't have a crystal ball. And I think Chuck Schumer has his work cut out for him. I think that Congress is going to have to really step up. I hope there is some bipartisan support, but I think the president is prepared to move forward on this and to really deliver for folks on what he's committed to do.
Whitley?
I think if anything passes, it'll be something about education. I mean, he's advocating for $506 billion, which is 7 times the Department of Education's annual budget. I don't know where he's going to get this money from, but he's consistently putting aggressive plans in place. I think maybe we could win on education, but I'm not really sure at this point what will pass, if anything.
Fair enough. I'll turn it back to state politics now, ladies. Governor Eric Holcomb this week sued lawmakers, calling the new law allowing themselves to call their own special session unconstitutional. And now, ladies, the Attorney General says the governor didn't have the right to file the suit. From the outside looking in, this is kind of a mess, Whitley.
Is that what it's called after we just passed, like, one of the best budgets with the most support?
I'm just talking specifically this case.
I don't know if that's what it is. I'd say it's more like inside baseball that the courts have to decide. The legislature feels as though they can call themselves into session, even though our Constitution states that they can't. And so here we are with the situation where we are interpreting the Constitution as one way and the legislature is doing something else. And so we have to literally rely on the courts to figure this out. And, you know, with the Attorney General, he was asked to get outside counsel. The Attorney General didn't say no, he didn't say yes. And so he did what he felt was necessary for the state of Indiana. I'm going to consistently support the governor, consistently advocating to uphold the Indiana Constitution and to support our state in the best way possible.
Laura, I'll get your thoughts on this in a moment. I just want to push back on Whitley here. Is it a power struggle, would you say, Whitley, within the party? Because that's kind of the way it looks.
I mean, I don't know if power is the word, but it's definitely a little bit of a tug of war right now.
Okay. Your thoughts on the case, Laura?
Well, I'm enjoying Whitley's response. She's doing a really good job, and she's representing her party well on this one because she's in a tough spot. I mean, I definitely think that it does expose a rift. It's clearly the folks in the legislature. I think they take precedence over the chief executive, which is the governor. But Whitley makes a great point. This is what is laid out in the state constitution, and frankly, it's not good government. When you think about when you're in a crisis situation at the executive level, you don't have the luxury of time to call your legislature back in for a special session. And I was thinking back today just of other times when we've had crises in the state, and the governor generally does consult the members of the legislature and convenes them behind the scenes. I mean, I'm thinking back to 9/11 when we had a crisis, right, and Governor O'Bannon was reaching out to the legislature. And when Governor O'Bannon died, and then Lieutenant Governor Joe Kernan, who became governor, was also reaching out to the legislature as well. It doesn't have to be a formalized structure. And I think, frankly, it just is. It really is wasteful when you think
Laura,
of
I want to get this last question in because we're running out of time.
Sure.
Mike Pence gave his speech this week, his first speech since having surgery and since leaving office. Some people are calling it a possible run for the 2024 presidential campaign or a start to it. Is he a viable candidate? Whitley, what say you?
I think it's way too early to speculate on 2024 presidential politics. But what I will say is it's good to hear his voice again. It's good to see him healthy. And he definitely has a clear vision for what he sees for America. So I'm glad to see him back on the scene.
Laura, yes or no? Is he running in 2024?
He's never going to escape being the guy whose boss unleashed a mob on him. So, I mean, I think it's somewhat irrelevant at this point.
All right, ladies, good to see you. Thank you very much for taking some time.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you. We'll be right back.
Take all Indiana politics on the go with you. Download our podcast now. Part of the All Indiana Podcast Network and allindianapodcastnetwork.com.
Thank you for joining us for All Indiana Politics on this Sunday. We'll continue to watch the courts for updates on the governor's lawsuit. We'll be back here next Sunday morning at 9:30. Have a great rest of your weekend.